Also, please, if everyone could mute their microphones, there will be time for questions and answers. At the end, you can feel free to type them in and I can ask the questions for you, or you yourself can ask the question. So thank you so much, Alison Hinderliter, and Jennifer Dalzin. Thank you so much for talking to us today. And I will turn this over to you, Alison, so you can start.
Thanks, Doris. And thanks for inviting us to do one of these lunch and learns. I've attended all three so far. They've been very helpful to find out what everybody else has been doing. And so if you read our intro, you'll know a little bit about the Newberry Library, or maybe you've come and visited us. But we are a small independent research library focusing on the humanities. And we have everything from medieval manuscripts to born digital material. We kind of cover many, many different kinds of formats. And we also have currently two very large crowdsourcing projects going on with our digital images and services department at the helm, of which Jennifer is the director, so you'll hear a little bit more about that later. And so with our various collections, we recognize the need for a DAMS about, I don't know, 20 years ago maybe. And we did finally decide on the one called Piction around 8 years ago. And as we put in our introduction, it was supposed to hold about 500,000 digital assets, and it's currently over 700,000. And Piction is nearing end of life, this instance of it anyway. So we're venturing out to look for a new one or an update of this one. Again, you'll hear a little bit more about that. So I am the curator of modern manuscripts and archives, and I have a staff of 3 archivists who work with me. And when we were all sent out of the building in mid-March to start working from home, there was a lot of questions about what we could do to be so far away from the physical material. And it turns out that we had plenty of stuff to do, and we're still busy, and we're even working with a paid intern from the University of Chicago this summer, all working remotely and doing a lot of data cleanup and a lot of policy creation, but also just going through our metadata backlog. And it is mostly working with our audiovisual material. Now, the Newberry isn't really known for having a lot of audiovisual material, but of course, with every collection comes a lot of AV material. With every family, there's home movies. With every collection of a researcher, there's potential oral histories. With every journalist, there's their notes that they speak into a dictaphone or radio broadcast. So our audio runs the gamut from wax cylinders to digital files. And our film and video runs just about every type of genre you can think of as well. And we've been fortunate enough to digitize a lot of it. So we have over 600 audio files and probably about 1,500 video files converted from film and from various video formats. And of course, once we digitize them and put them into our DAMs, then we need to find the time to actually view them and listen to them and create metadata for them, which is very, very time consuming. So during work from home, we've actually been able to catch up on a lot of that. And we've also been able to create projects for other staff at the Newberry who don't have enough work from home duties, because most of their work at the Newberry involves working with collections, whether it be circulation staff or reshelving or conservation. They have asked us for projects, and we've been able to put together Microsoft Team project pages and give them files and give them a form to fill out so they can do the listening and the viewing. and create the metadata for us, which has been really, really helpful. So Piction, I don't know if any of you have ever worked with it, but I'm gonna show you what it looks like. And this is actually a view called Piction Workbench, which is the view that anyone who can enter metadata sees. There is a staff view for people just to reference, and then there's an editor view, and that's this view. Piction does not, or at least we don't have a front end to push out to our website. So Piction is completely internal, at least in our shop. But there is a search screen. It is a little bit limited, but I can show you some audiovisual files here, both audio and film. And then over on the right-hand bar, there is the metadata, which we've been filling in. So for example, and I'm not going to do anything with sound because I know Zoom kind of makes, in fact, even video, it kind of is jumpy. So I'll just show you a little bit of it. But this is a home movie of Ben Hecht's young daughter, Jenny. And I noticed the person who did the metadata didn't put in the date, but we know the date because it was her 5th birthday party and she was born in 1943. So we can just easily open up metadata and just put in 1948 and save it, and it's in there. We can also do some batch metadata editing. So if we have a whole series, we can assign the series the same call number and you know, some of the same metadata from these fields. And the playback is not great. It's okay. The biggest problem with the playback inside Piction is that you can pause it and get it to go again, but you can't fast forward and you can't rewind. It just goes back to 0. And I'm not quite sure what's going on here. These are a bunch of 5-year-olds. It looks like they've been tasked with cleaning the garage. But this one, Piction has all of our, not just the audio visual, but also all of our digitized images and our Born Digital materials and our Newberry archives. And you can see down here in the lower left, there's all of the categories listed. It does tend to time out, and it doesn't always have a great search function. It particularly times out when you're putting in a search word that is too capacious, like Chicago or something like that. So you kind of have to work with that a little bit. Also, the people, and Jennifer can jump in if I'm not giving the right information, but it's my impression that the vendors of Piction have kind of they've kind of pivoted away from making dams. And so when we have requests, sometimes it takes them a long time to get back to us about it.
I wouldn't say that they've pivoted away from making dams. I think that they've changed their focus to making dams for business clients. And so I think sometimes our particular requests are difficult for them to answer, or they have higher priorities or bigger paychecks from those other clients. And I would also say some of the service issues that we have are that we are several versions out of date. And so their team often doesn't really know how our old software works if they've come in later. But the end result is the same, that sometimes it is a lag in timely response.
Right. And I mean, the big issue that we're coming across, right, Jennifer, is that this version of it has just reached its end of life. And so we, after 8 years, we have to move on to something else because our demands for digitized material is only growing, and it's getting harder and harder to handle something that is not outward facing. It's a not seamless workflow for us right now to push this material out. So I think we're going to take questions at the end, but feel free to put them in the chat box. But I will hand it over to Jennifer if you want to take up the reins.
All right, let's see. Go ahead and share my screen here. This one. All right, is everybody seeing a screen that says digital asset management?
Yes.
Okay, so a little bit about our selection process, both in 2011 and then how that has shaped our process today. Because it's a building process that we've had. We've tried not to reinvent wheels, but also learn from our previous experience. So as Alison said, this is Piction. She was showing you there. Let's see. We started creating digital content, depending on where you look at it, sometime in the mid-90s or really in earnest starting in the early 2000s. And initially our digital asset management system was very much what a bunch of you probably had in your histories or maybe in your currents. We were putting things on CD and that seemed great. And even in the short, I came on doing a project, our first digital project at the Newberry in 2002. And even at the end of that project, we had piles and piles of CDs everywhere, which were difficult to manage. Soon after, we were able to work with our IT department and we were loading image files to servers. I kind of put this as our second digital asset management system. I will say it is also the most frequently used digital asset management system by all of our imaging staff. So our photographers, our manager of that department, even though we have a digital asset management system, they consistently and daily just go directly to our servers. They're doing searches on file names in the way that we all do for files. So this continues to be an important digital asset management system for us. So this is a server at the Newberry. We then went to a Thumbs Plus database, and I unfortunately can't access that from home. I still have it. You can see my my files there. So we still do have a copy of that old database. It has very small images in it, but we were using Thumbs Plus primarily as a department tool, but trying to get it going for use by staff as well. Sorry, not you. From Thumbs Plus, we decided that maybe we could use Content DM. That would be something that would be easy to use by staff, and then eventually we might be able to make it a public tool. And this is a tool, again, though we use it in different ways, we are still using, not as digital asset management, but for public access. So we had a whole series of digital asset management systems prior to 2011, 2012, when several things happened. First, we set up the Department of Digital Initiatives and Services. Up to that point, we didn't have a centralized area. We had our photo duplication department, but we did not have a group that was kind of looking at digital assets or all the other activities involved with creating digital assets. And we combined photo duplication with our digital publications department, which was one guy, and he was leaving, and so we created this new department. We had a grant to review digital asset management systems, and then as part of that grant, we were supposed to select and implement and then meet some basic benchmarks of progress. So what we did in fine Newberry form, we set up a committee, and it was a cross-institution committee which had the new department. We also brought in our information technology division. Modern Manuscripts played a big role in this, not only because we knew we would be reformatting so much of their material, but because they knew so much about what was going to be coming in our collections that we would have to think about. We also brought in our collection services because we have such a connection with our online catalog. We knew that that would be a source of much of our metadata. So it was a group of several people. We had lots of meetings, and I was just looking at my thing. You can see some of our notes and our evaluations, and I'm going to show you a few of these things that we did, having all of these groups come together to talk about needs assessment and then how we would go about selecting a product. So this is a document that I can share with the group if people are interested. I can come back around to it at the end. This happens to be one of several needs assessments that were done by the individual groups that were part of this committee. This is one that would have been done by, I think it's a consolidation. You can say I have up the Modern Manuscript section where we looked at all the types of documents we thought we might have, what we wanted to do with them, what the formats were. So we really looked at types, we looked at formats, and then we talked about the access needs and the metadata needs for them going into it. At the time, this was also a great way to see exactly what was going on in the institution. This was a really ambitious list, and with the hopes, I think somewhere on here we probably even talked about washing dishes for us as well. I mean, it was the idea that we were going to get the system and it could do everything. And I think as we found in the 8 years since then, and many other institutions as well, a lot of different products have developed to take pieces of these. It did not all come from one system. This is kind of a long version of our needs assessment. The short version really is summed up. I found this, it was a text document that was passed along to me from the director of IT at a meeting that we had. We looked at all of these ambitious goals and came up what was most important. So we went through when we started contacting vendors, really looking at a few deal breaker criteria. Were they able to do this or not? And it's a pretty short list there, but there's also some pretty big concepts in there. And we will come back to this and where this fits in. We took this as an approach from what were we trying to accomplish? So not only surveying of everything that we had, but what were we really trying to do with this? And I think one of our #1 goals was this one here, which was gathering our digitized collection items. So while we had all this board and digital content, we had started to create videos that we were putting up. We knew that the first goal that we had was gathering everything that we had digitized already from our collection items and getting that under control. At the time, we only had about 105,000 of them, but it seemed like a lot, and it seemed like it was going to take us a while to get there. And we actually had both current and then long-term goals, long-term looking at 5 years. And so we've kind of passed that. We have exceeded all expectations in that part. We took all of those needs assessments, put them together, and we really started coming up with checklists that as we talked to vendors, as we looked at vendor products, we could go down a list highlighting some of the most important and saying, did the product seem to meet that need? And I'll tell you, a lot of times what the vendor says, what you think is happening, and the reality of using the system is not always the same. But we went through and we had a checklist that we used for our product evaluation. And probably nobody really noticed at that point, but on the bottom we had a list of, I think at that time we did about 15 vendors that we called and we looked at products. And I will say all of those vendors ended up being proprietary software. We had many, many meetings talking about open source and the communities behind those, and how so many of our communities, whether it's libraries and archives and museums, were working on these very ambitious products versus things that were coming out of companies. And At the time, what we basically determined is that though the open source people seemed to understand us, they really didn't have a product to give to us, and anything that was coming out really required a lot more development support and systems administration support than the Newberry would ever be able to provide. So we had to eliminate all of those products that were available at the time, and we started looking at proprietary software. When it came down to it, we had a very short list of products to choose from. And the main considerations were these here, or technical considerations that came from our IT department. Because we were going to be running this on a server in the building, at that time, things like a cloud-based solution was not available to us. So we really had to work with the rules of our IT department. And things like ability to use our Active Directory was more important than its ability to work with compound objects in the way we would like it to. So the technical considerations were a large factor. And as always, money. It was a grant, and we had grant funds, and we did not have any additional funds. And we were really looking, we could spend the grant funds in a certain amount of time. So between money and technical considerations, that was a big part of our decision making. I will go quickly through Piction, since Alison has already shown you some of these. This is the administrative module. Very few people, I think 3 of us at the Newberry ever use the administrative module. It's difficult to use. Our documentation right now is out of date and not necessarily geared to the level of the people using it. But we do a lot of metadata exports. There's a lot that we do with bulk images in here. So there is an administrative module. Alison showed you Workbench, and there's a larger group of people that use that. And Alison's team included, we have a few people in our collection services department, and then primarily in my department in digital initiatives and services. And then this is the Discoverer, which potentially could be a public interface. It's now our staff interface. We have never felt that giving this to the public would be adequate for their needs. It's basically a search box with no information with what's around, what's in this database. There's no browsability. So there is not a public interface. This is as close as we have, and it's used by staff, or kind of general staff. To supplement or to make up for this lack of a public interface, we do a bunch of different things. We still use Content DM, and I'm showing you our Chicago and the Midwest collection just because it's fun. We have several different, kind of thematically based collections. Obviously, this means that this is a different database, that we are taking things from our DAMs. We then need to prepare it for Content DM, whatever differences in metadata requirements they have. We need to pull images out. If we make changes in the DAMs, they don't automatically happen in Content DM. So there are multiple places to manage. So we use Content DM for public interface. We've also been using Internet Archive more, with the primary benefit of being able to reach new audiences. With our Content DM collections, people have to know about us. They have to know about our kind of consortial arrangement. We are finding people who know nothing about the Newberry through Internet Archive, and that's a strong goal of ours. So then we have a third spot that we put things. We also connect online, publicly accessible online content through finding aids. So for this particular, if you click on that view online, it would take you to a Content DM collection image. I think it might be Internet Archive. You're starting to see part of the problem we have with all of these buckets. It will take you somewhere that isn't Piction. We also link content from our online catalog. Alison mentioned some user engagement projects we have. I'm showing you here, this is Newberry Transcribe. We now have 61,594 pages from manuscript collections that people have been transcribing for us. So our content is available here. And then we also have a postcard tag project. And I don't have the numbers here, but it's growing every day because we have so many postcards. So people are helping right now with doing captions and tagging. In the future, we will also have them transcribing messages on the backs of postcards. So the question, why are we changing? In large part, Alison had a nice success story of how things are working. She talked a little bit about slow time. That has to do with our network. It has to do with the amount of material we have in there. And so we're having issues there. We're larger than we thought we would be with the system. We've had it for more years than we thought we would have it. And in addition to what's pictured right now, the 775,000 files, we have 1.1 million files that are stored only at Internet Archive. We just do not have the capacity to bring those into our dams. We have another 384,000 metadata records that are only in a content DM collection. Again, to bulk ingest those are problematic. And then we know that while we do have born digital materials in the dams right now, Alison has a lot more she wants to give us, and we just don't have the capacity with the system that we have to handle those materials. So that's really the motivation for finding a new system. Our software is also out of date, and we talked a little bit about this in answer to Alison's question. And one of the reasons our software is out of date, we talked about having to coordinate it with our system. And as Piction has grown, we have not necessarily grown with it. And so we are unable to handle some of the changes they've made if we're going to put it on our servers. And for that reason, we're looking at software as a service model. I think it would be ideal for an institution that has limited technical support. It's only ideal if you can afford it, though. It's obviously, it's a line item in the budget. It's an annual line item in the budget. So that is certainly a consideration as we look whether or not we will be able to afford what we need. We took here for our process right now, we did not have committees talking about all of our needs again. We looked at what we knew from the past, and much of that has not changed. We brought in new people from Modern Manuscripts, IT, collection services, just to review this information and have some conversations. And we built on 8 years of experience. So we kind of honed in our criteria again, and you can see we have some of these, everything we had, we added some more. There's some things we marked, this isn't important to us anymore, and then got some comments from people on what would be key considerations. But like the last time, while we had all of these details to think about as we were looking at products, it really came down to a few key points. And one of them was, there's very little talk in the first round about the public interface. We thought much more about our backend needs, and that lack of public interface for us, because we are so access-centered, has become problematic. We have very inconsistent metadata in different spots. We've got things scattered all over the place. So a key consideration is whether we have an interface that supports browsing and searching and all the different search styles of our users. We really needed that backend management for large files, so I can do something like bring in 384 records and not deal with them one at a time. And then it would not only meet what we're doing now, but we are anticipating much more growth, exponential growth from what we've seen in the last 10 years based on new equipment that's making larger files, additional outsourcing projects. So we know we're going to grow, and I think we need to give ourselves a little bit more room than doubling our size. So here, I'll just talk with the generous interface. This is an article really just talking about something that doesn't give people a box to search in, really helping people discover material. This came in today, and I thought it was kind of interesting. Here's one of my coworkers who's been with us this whole time, but said, who asked, am I missing something, or are we just unable to do this without an image management system that has a public interface? So it's been interesting to see things that have been important to us are really kind of going throughout the entire institution. Types of projects, why we need this backend management. I'll say some of the things that we have queued up. All of those crowdsourced transcriptions that we're getting from Newberry Transcribe, they're there. We cannot put them into the item level records at this point unless we have a more robust tool. We have a lot of OCR transcription that's been done. That's also separate from metadata. We can't bring those in without a tool that lets me deal with thousands and thousands of metadata records at a time. We changed our rights statement in 2018, and we're really proud of it, that we're open access. You wouldn't know that by looking at the rights statement within our metadata. It doesn't indicate that, and that's very problematic, but I have to change 775,000 records as opposed, and I don't want to do that one by one. We're looking at adding the rightstatement.org statements to individual content. We do it for things that are in copyright because that feels really important. But equally important is trying to give the statements for things that are in public domain so people know that they can use those. And I would love to combine, meet that initial goal of actually combining our collection by bringing in another 1.1 million things, but we are unable to do that right now. Reality is money is going to be there, whether or not we are going to be able to afford. We have a system that looks like it would be lovely and it would do a lot of things. We have a potential donor. We don't know how many years of funding that would be. So we're really going to, we're starting with what would work best and then also looking at all the plan B's and C's and D's and E's as well. And I think that brings me to about the time we're supposed to be and is maybe a good jumping board for questions.
Okay, I'm gonna start with the chat. So let me go back. And Alison, some people find it funny that you refer to the Newberry as a small research library. I don't know if you saw that.
I did. Yeah, I mean, I guess compared to other research libraries in the nation, like Huntington, we're a little on the small side, but for Chicago, I guess small is not the most accurate description.
Let's see, there's one question here. Have you done a crosswalk/export to content DM for Carly, for instance?
Yes, we've done that. We've done that several times because we've moved back and forth from Piction to content DM, from content DM back. We've also gone from Piction to Internet Archive. So we've done a lot of crosswalking between systems.
Okay, and then the next question is, how do you get images and metadata into CCC from Piction?
I'll tell you, it's been several years since we've done that, and Jen Wolf kind of coordinated that. I know we had to pull images. Well, we do a lot of exporting, and I don't really remember what our ingest process for CCC was. We have not done any since the initial batch. We've been waiting for the possibility. Most of our objects are compound objects, or either at least front and back, or multi-page. And so it's been some time, and I really don't remember how we did that. I know we just had to export things and then go with whatever ingest tool CCC had.
And I think, okay, there's one more question. How accurate has the CS been with MD?
MD meaning metadata?
Data.
I mean, I think it's been fairly accurate. I'm not sure. I don't know if I understand the question correctly, but it's, I mean, it's based on our standards, and we have internal guidelines and standards for how we're entering the metadata.
Well, I mean, we're basically, we're using Dublin Core in all places at this point, so it's been fairly accurate. We've been it's been more challenging, although I'm thinking when we take things either from our finding aids or the catalog, where we're going from from that data to the Dublin Core, but anything from Piction, Internet Archive, and Content DM has all been fairly straightforward with those fields. I'm trying to. I remember we had there was one system that I can't remember. I remember we had some issue. No, that was when we were going from the database. We had a database, an old database for postcards that we were going into Content DM that we had to do a crosswalk, and that was more challenging, but that was not a Dublin core. So that was the issue with that one.
Okay, and now we just got another question that came in. Are there any other dams that are being considered along with software as a service model to replace the current system?
Yes. Most of what we have looked at for Piction also has a new version that could either be housed locally or it could be software as a service. It's a Piction cloud. We also looked at it. I think potentially, I don't think the one that we're looking at, Cortex, which is Cortex with a C-O-R-T-E-X. I don't believe that they have a model that we would be able to support on site. Others may be able to. We've also looked, we did a 2-year pilot project with Adam Matthew. They have a product called Quartex, Q-U-A-R-T-E-X. And that could be either software as a service, or there could be some options to host it locally. And then there was another product toward the end that kind of got to a end zone of evaluation called NetX that could go either way, either on site or software as a service.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. But I have one for you guys. So you said that the committee that you set up with the cross institutions, how many individuals were on that committee between, like IT and yourselves, and with like 15, 20?
No, this time around, so this time our committee, we have our digital services manager, we have our digital initiatives manager, and then our web developer librarian, who are in my department, digital initiatives and services. We have our principal cataloger from collection services. We have Alison and then Catherine Grand George. And remind me of Catherine's title, Alison.
She's the manuscripts and archives librarian. So that's 2 from our section.
In that section. And then we have our director of information technology. So that, and actually we also have somebody from our development office who's kind of not really an official member. She's just interested in knowing what's going on because there's a potential donor. So that's been the group this time. That's been the core group. We'll also say we also work, we have a group called the Digital Initiatives Advisory Group that has been part of this discussion, but they meet less frequently. That committee has, I think, what is it, Alison? There's got to be like 29 people on that committee now.
Yeah.
That's a very large committee with varying degrees of knowledge.
And that's representatives from all over the library. It involves research and education. It involves public programs. It involves development more, and also our teachers, teacher programs. So a lot of people who are invested in what gets digitized and what gets prioritized as digital collections have a say in that one, but they don't really go over sort of this technical aspect of it.
And I think that's really the message that I shared with a colleague today. I have so many of the people we work with, they don't want to be involved with this technical aspect and don't really understand what it means until all of a sudden it affects their daily work, such as we want to participate in a very important, map website going on, and I've just found out we can't because I don't have a link to share with them from our system. And so, there's a workaround there. What'll happen is my team will drop everything. We'll try to get these maps that are wanted. We'll put them in a different site, and then he can link to that. But there's a lot of workaround to have, one end result.
Okay, I think that's all the questions that we have for you two. unless anybody wants, just to blurt it out, or, any suggestions, comments.
Also, if anyone wants us to share the documentation that Jennifer so nicely added to her screens, there's nothing private or confidential about them. We can certainly share them with this group if it would be helpful if you're making the same decisions at your shop.
Yeah, it looks like people would like that, Allison.
Okay.
Perfect. Yes, if you could share the document, that would be great. And someone said, yeah, they'd like to see the needs assessment. Okay, perfect. All right, then I want to thank you ladies. If there are no other questions, thank you ladies for joining us today. And I do want to mention that we have another event coming up next week in the series. I will be releasing the post for that later today.
And it'll be the last one in
Yeah,
this
the
series.
last one. So hopefully all of you guys can join us. And thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.